I want to say that this is a very, very important annual meeting. It takes on a different dimension because it is our 59th annual meeting of the bank, but it is also the 60th celebration of the establishment of the African Development Bank. So it's a time for us this year to, at this annual meeting, to reflect, for us to also look at the journeys that we've come through and what we have done and what we have achieved as a bank group over the last 60 years, but also at the time to think through some of the new challenges in the world and the role of the bank with financial architecture as we deal with those particular issues. We have to therefore think about what's the role of the African Development Bank as we look to the future. Yeah, we look at the back, we see what we've achieved, but a lot of big challenges are ahead of us, and we want to make sure that we are well positioned in dealing with that. And that's why the African Development Bank's annual meeting this year, the title of it is Africa's Transformation. The African Development Bank Group and the reforms of the global financial architecture. So you find us right inside of this, it's like a sandwich in which you find yourself as right in the middle of it, which is Africa's transformation, and I was talking about that. It's very, very critical. We are very critical for that to happen as a bank group. But as we make that happen, there are global issues that are coming up in which we have to review our business model, look at what we can do, look at how we can do it, and look at how we can do it with others to be able to achieve that. First, let me talk to you about Africa. As you know me, there's no doubt about it that you know that I believe strongly in Africa's potential. I believe in Africa's present. I believe in Africa's tomorrow. I believe in Africa's future. And why wouldn't I believe in that? It's not just because I'm president of the African Development Bank Group. I'm also an African. And I know what it is to develop and to develop with pride. And we have the potential to be really great as a continent. And the issues are as follows. First is that where do you go in the world if you have the population that we have? You know, take a look at the population of Africa in terms of demographic potential that we have. You know, it's the size of China and the size of Europe taken together today. You know, that's what Africa's population really is going to be. And second is the demographic advantage with the youth that we have. We have 477 million young people below the age of 35. And that means that Africa will be the workforce of the world in terms of the young people, in terms of skills, in terms of capacity, in terms of entrepreneurship, in terms of innovation to be able to take on the world in the labor market, but also a lot of opportunities that are out there in the world. We cannot miss that. Third, we talk today about the whole issue of energy transitions. Globally, we've been talking about global energy transitions. Of course, we should, because everybody's worried about continued CO2 emissions and the need for us to contain that through energy transitions and moving into more renewable energy. Well, two things I want to say about that. Africa will drive the global agenda. So therefore, as the world now transitions into renewable energy, Africa will be front and center in terms of harnessing the power of renewable energy to drive our world. And as you know, there's a lot of interest in looking at green hydrogen, looking at green ammonia and all of that, which are very, very going to be driving the world, whether it's fertilizers, whether it is jet fuels and all of those things. All those things are going to require using renewable energy, which is solar. And so I just want to say that in terms of Africa's positioning in influencing and shaping the future of the world in energy transition, it's going to be very, very significant. The second part of that is what happens with regard to green metals that you have to do that. Okay, and so Africa today has 90% of all the platinum in the world. You know, it has well over 66, 70% of all the copper that you have in the world, 50% of all the other metals, whether it's nickel you're talking about, whether it is lithium that you're talking about. Africa has massive amount of these natural metals. Well, these natural metals are the ones that are going to determine the future of electric vehicles in the world. And so how Africa harnesses that for its own transformation is going to be very, very critical. but also very critical for how Africa positions itself globally to play in those value chains. And so there are potentials, there are opportunities, there are positioning issues for Africa within the context of those global electric vehicles and battery energy storage systems that you have in the world. So these are the things that when you talk about transformation, Africa's transformation will have to happen not with what Africa does not have. It has to happen with what Africa has. And how Africa harnesses those are the things that are going to drive its fast-paced transformation. Let me also say that when you take a look at African economies, we all are in the world today where we have a lot of headwinds to global economic growth and development. You have it happening because of a lot of factors. First is climate change. But beyond that is the political will to drive that transformation of Africa that we are talking about. And one good example of it was what happened last year with the African Development Bank. And that's how we were able to raised from that summit $72 billion collectively, globally. That is the largest ever in the history of Africa towards dealing with any issue that we were able to mobilize globally. And I'm saying that to make one point. That point is this. African Development Bank, I said Africa's transformation, African Development Bank, and the global financial architecture reforms. We don't walk alone. I don't even know how to walk alone. We work with others to get things done. And we are able to pull all of that together globally to get $72 billion for African economies to be able to do their agriculture. So that's on that part of that. The other part, which is critical for Africa's economic transformation, is energy. You cannot industrialize in the dark. You cannot be competitive in the dark. And you cannot grow economies when you have no power. Electricity is the lifeblood in the body. It's like the blood in your body or mine. You either have it, you live. You don't have it, your economy dies. It's that simple. There's no two ways about it. And we as African Development Bank, since I was elected president in 2015, I took it very seriously because I knew that without electricity, we're wasting time. And we launched what's called the New Deal on Energy for Africa. Since we launched that in 2016, the average access of electricity on the continent was 32%. We moved that to 57%, just within a very, very short period of time. And now at the spring meetings of the World Bank, myself and Ajay Banga, the president of the World Bank Group, got together and announced to the world that we will connect 300 million Africans to electricity by 2030, collectively between the World Bank and the African Development Bank. And when you see the president of the World Bank and I walking that way, when was the last time that you saw that happening? And the reason for that is because the times have changed. No single institution, I don't care how much money you have, is going to be able to solve the challenges that we face. It's only by working together. And my bank staff know me that my principle is what I call the baobab approach. You go to an African village, you have a baobab tree there, right? You try and put your hands around it, you can't. But if you join your hands with other people around that tree, you can put your hands around it. That's what we do as African Development Bank. Baobab approach, work together with others to accelerate actions that will allow Africa to fast track its own economic transformation. And so when the world, Ajay Banga and I launched that, that would be totally transformational. Just think of Africa would look like, And that I want to link back to the other part of the change or reforms of the global financial architecture by saying that it's not just the architecture that needs to change. The people that are in the architecture also need to change. We need to have a way of working together collaboratively, cooperatively, and effectively to deliver great results. The people we serve don't care about our flags. And people who know me know I don't care about flags. Nobody eats your flags. Everybody wants results. So let's work together, collaboratively and cooperatively, and deliver the results. But great things are happening with regard to that work. And I also want to tell you the stories that we hear sometimes about Africa's transformation when you look at things in the Sahel. So that's desert to power. 250 million people will get access to electricity through the solar, 10,000 megawatts of solar. So that's the kind of thing that I believe it's going to transform Africa very, very much. But let me come back to some other things that are fundamental to Africa's transformation. One is infrastructure. Infrastructure is just like the backbone in the body that you have and I have. If you have a good backbone, you stand up straight. If you don't, you can't. That is what it is. Having ports, having rail, having power transmission line, having transport corridors, having digital infrastructure. Those are the things that actually make economies to work. And that is what we do best at the African Development Bank. You know, we are the largest financial institution that is financing infrastructure on this continent. Since I became president, maybe about almost 9 years now, we've done roughly about $50 billion of investment in infrastructure, from rails to ports to airports to digital infrastructure to transport corridors and all water and sanitation and all of that. And so we will continue as African Development Bank to push more for infrastructure. And that is why we launched something called Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa, called AGIA, Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. That alliance is to mobilize $10 billion of private sector financing into infrastructure, but green infrastructure. Because Africa is still developing its infrastructure, so it can't afford to have space to use green infrastructure. So whether you're talking about desalination, whether you're talking about transport systems, whether you're talking about renewable energy, that's what. And I just came back from G7 meeting of finance ministers and of the governors, central bank governors, and they were highly complimentary of what we're doing in Africa and gave great support to the Alliance for Green Infrastructure in Africa. But having said all of that, you'll probably ask me, Africa's transformation will have to depend on the Africa Continental Free Trade Area. Yeah, it will. But I will be precise to say the following, that we need to turn that Africa Continental Free Trade Area potential into reality. And to do that requires that we have industrial policies that will allow us to have industrial manufacturing that allows us to specialize in value chains in which we have comparative advantage, both for national, regional, and global markets. Now, if we don't, it will be a very bad mistake, because simply trading is not enough. It's not the first time we've been trading. We've been trading forever. Our great-great-great-great-grandfathers were trading. But if I am trading with you, maize, and you're trading with me, sorghum, in a free trade zone, both of us are going to be both competitively and efficiently poor, because we are not moving into manufacturing. And so I'm saying that because industrial manufacturing must be at the core of that Africa's economic transformation. And that must be because it is an outbound-looking, outward-looking industrial manufacturing stance that allows Africa to expand its exports around the world. And so when I think about infrastructure at the bank, it's not just about, I want to connect that village to that village. No. What are the corridors? What are the strategic infrastructure platforms we must have that will allow Africa to stand strong and be competitive? And that's what we are doing at the African Development Bank. I'll give you a few examples of some of those. Take, for example, the Lobito Corridor. The Lobito Corridor is a corridor that is linking Angola to Zambia and linking it to DRC Congo. And that's a corridor in which the African Development Bank is putting in $500 million on the Zambia side to be able to construct that particular corridor, working very closely with the US government and the Africa Finance Corporation. Take, for example, the Lagos-Abidjan Highway, $15.6 billion. We've mobilized all of that, interest for it, commitment to it, to be able to do it. Think about the Central Corridor for railway, linking Tanzania all the way to Burundi and DRC. That's about almost $3.5 or $3.4 billion that we are trying to raise to make it happen for them. All I'm trying to say is this: we need infrastructure, but more importantly, we need connectivity. We need to be able to connect our countries to each other. That's the only way we are going to be able to move. And I'm sure you all are media houses. You've seen what my friend Aliko Dangote said recently, that he needs about 35 visas to be able to move around Africa. And that doesn't make any sense. There's just no way you can trade. There's no way you can be competitive, or you can have a regionally integrated market if people cannot move. So there has to be soft side to the economic transformation we're talking about. The ease of movement, labor mobility. It's very, very important how skills move from one country to the other. It's very, very important. And so I just want to say that that's the issue. And I did say something about the issue of debt before I went into all those areas. I want to say a few things about it before I open it up for you. But I'll say the following with regard to the issue of debt. You have a situation wherein, like, between 2014 and 2024, where we are, maybe 19 African countries issued Eurobonds well over $200 billion. And of course, things were easy at the time. That you have low interest rates, and therefore people took advantage of that, which is fine. But today, with devaluation, with also the contractionary monetary policy you have now back in the EU zone or in the US, the cost of servicing debt has gone off the roof. And so the critical issues that we need to manage are as follows, to make sure we build resilience for that transformation. First is that we have to make sure that it's not just about countries borrowing. They need more concessional financing. They need more concessional financing. Most of the borrowing that you see is commercial, private sector lending, Eurobonds or commercial lenders. So that's the first thing. And so second is also to make sure that there's a lot more efficiency in the use of expenditures, public expenditures, for what those loans are being borrowed for. I mean, if you take if you're a loan, you can have what I call hamburger loans. So something I eat today and it's gone. Or I can use that same credit card and I can invest in a house or real estate or something. So productive investment with loans that actually helps economies to grow, they're fine. There's nothing wrong in debt, but you just shouldn't be having bad debt. That's you and I take debt all the time. It's how we manage that debt that's important. The third I want to say is that the global financial architecture itself needs to be changed to be able to make sure that African countries are not penalized, especially when they access global capital markets. Let me explain myself here, and it's a very fundamental issue you will hear right through these annual meetings, and that is the so-called Africa risk premium. You hear it all the time. The Africans are borrowing, countries are borrowing more at high premium rates, yield curves above those of others that have similar ratings as African countries. So what I mean by that is there needs to be a fairer assessment of Africa's risk, because UNDP shows that if Africa's risks are properly and fairly estimated, that African countries will save $75 billion a year just in debt service that they have. So there's a big agenda when we talk about the global financial architecture, is the whole issue of how we look at the proper assessment of Africa's risk and so on. And of course, you all know that we've been working very well on the issue of the special drawing rights. And I'm pleased that together with the Inter-American Development Bank and the IMF, that the board of directors of IMF approved that, which is a hybrid instrument that will allow the stretching of those SDRs to be able to lend more. I'm pleased that the board approved $20 billion as a limit for the rechallenging towards hybrid capital for use by multilateral development banks, for example. And it's just this simple. Those SDRs can be leveraged by 4 times, and that $20 billion will become $80 billion. And just tells you the resources you need faster for development. The last thing I would say about Africa, which you will hear throughout our meetings today, for the next few days, is how Africa mobilizes domestic resources for its development. Because it's not just about loans, it's about how you mobilize resources for development. But this much I would say, that if you are simply taking more money, water, and you're putting water into a basket, it can never be full. So it's not just about what goes in, it's the efficiency in which you manage it, the losses you prevent, and also some of the illicit capital flows and some of the money we lose to corruption and all that. We also have to deal with it. So in the next 4 days, these are some of the issues that you'll be hearing. Our chief economist is here, Professor Urama. You will hear a lot from him throughout this week about Africa, the different growth patterns in different regions of Africa and so on. You'll also hear quite a lot from us as we think about agriculture, as we think about infrastructure, as we think about energy, as we think about debt, and as you think about issues of investing in women and in boys, in the youth. You will hear a lot of those throughout these annual meetings. Now let me end by saying how proud I am to be working for a continent that has hope, and how much I feel, and my team know this. This, for me, as president of the bank, I have great staff. This is not a job for us. It is a mission. It's a responsibility that we have. 60 years ago, founders of this bank set up this bank to help us move Africa forward. And we have moved Africa forward in many ways. But today we are a very solid, we're a global financial institution today. We're not just an African institution. We're a global financial institution that's bringing innovation to the marketplace of reforms of global financial architecture. The bank launched a hybrid capital of $750 million, the first hybrid capital ever issued by any multilateral development bank was issued by the African Development Bank, oversubscribed by $5 billion. The bank is innovating when it comes to the use of leveraging its balance sheet. We actually did synthetic securitization. What that means in simple terms is, it's like sometimes you go to a doctor and they keep telling you some names out of medical books. You think your situation is worse than it really was. But what I'm really saying is you take risks off your balance sheet for sovereign operations and non-sovereign operations, and you give it to somebody else. You give it to private sector. We are the first and the only multilateral development bank to be able to do that for sovereign and non-sovereign operations, which allows us to free up more than $10 billion to lend more. What I'm saying is that we are celebrating our work, our achievements, mindful of the great task ahead of us, but undeterred, knowing fully well that we have the capacity, the ability, and the support of our shareholders to continue to innovate, to move Africa forward relentlessly. Let me once again welcome you to the annual meetings of the African Development Bank. For those of you that probably followed me, I spoke to the All Africa Media Group. Are here, many of you are here. That's because I really believe that you are the ones that have the duty, the responsibility, the moral obligation to talk about all of the things that are happening, Africa's transformation, the African Development Bank, and of course, the reforms of the global financial architecture. I have no doubt you do justice to that this week. Thank you very much and welcome again.